If James Bond were to defend against the king's pawn, then he'd choose the Alekhines. 1 knight f6. It's dangerous, racy, and bloody hairy. The Aston Martin of chess openings. It leaves your opponent shaken, not stirred. Kitsch aside, I've been playing the Alekhines ever since I was 15 years old, when I decided that the Sicilian dragon was both too turgid and theoretical. I gave the fire-breathing bishop the boot and hankered after Alekhine's horse. Here I've prepared for you a repertoire that combines state-of-the-art development, in particular the new Kengis variation, along with my own tried-and-tested pet lines. First up is the 4 pawns attack. On the second move, white shifts his e-pawn up to e5, attacking the black knight. The black knight then jumps into the d5 square in the centre of the board. White plays his d-pawn up to d4. Black challenges the centre with pawn to d6. White then once again attacks the knight in the centre with pawn to c4. The knight drops back to b6, and white bolsters the centre with his f-pawn up to f4. Of all lines against the Alekhine, this is white's most uncompromising. He tries to destroy black with a whole mass of pawns in the centre. However, I'm going to show you one of my pet lines which completely undermines this position for white. It goes as follows. First we capture in the centre with pawn captures pawn. White naturally captures back with the f-pawn to retain the central pawn mass. And now we prepare to fianchetto our king's bishop with pawn to g6. This is a slightly unusual system for black, but also a very good one. I'll let you into a little secret. My lifetime score with this system is in the 80 to 90% region.
The centre counter defence, that's 1e4, d5, belongs to that group of openings which most grandmasters label as inferior. Yet Vishy Anand used it against Garry Kasparov in their recent World Championship match. So that says to me that 1d5 can't be all bad. And what you'll see from the information on this tape will prove that point. Now I've chosen systems for black which are inherently sound, yet strive for the initiative from the word go. They lead to super sharp positions, where Carnage is the name of the game. I'm going to recommend the modern system of the Scandinavian defence to you. And that starts with the moves e4, d5, e takes d5, knight f6. With several separate sections on this video. In the first section, we'll see white playing c4. But that will be answered by the super sharp Icelandic Gambit. I hope to prove that this is not only a sound choice for black, but it's an excellent aggressive choice, and white will struggle to contain black's active pieces. In the second section, we deal with bishop b5 check, a move not to be underestimated, and a move which was employed by Bobby Fischer. White plays to keep his extra pawn, and I'm going to recommend an obscure and little known move, knight bd7. We'll see that black's not too worried about white keeping his pawn. We'll see black striving for active counterplay on the light squares, and in several lines he may even regain his pawn with a better game. The third section deals with the so-called main line, d4. But here I'm going to recommend the Jadoul Gambit, bishop g4, a modern interesting treatment where again black doesn't worry too much about material. His main thought is activity, attack, and he's quite happy to give up a pawn to do it. The positions reached are very similar to those of the Icelandic Gambit. The do-or-die approach by black, but he obtains excellent play with this unusual move. And in the final section, we'll see what happens if white plays the rather timid move knight c3. Then black simply catches back on d5, and in all lines obtains a very comfortable game. So a full repertoire with the Scandinavian defence. Firstly, I'll be looking at the tricky Icelandic Gambit, which occurs after e takes d5, knight f6, c4, white's attempt to be a clear pawn up, and now e6. And this is a gambit which white really can't decline, unless he wants to allow black a very easy game. For instance, if white now plays d4, black plays e takes d5. This is a prospectless variation of the French for white. I'll just show you how black equalises with ease. For instance, now knight c3, bishop e7, this is just one move of many, knight f3 by white, black castles, and now just say c takes d5, that's one move of many, knight takes d5, bishop d3, and now black has a number of moves which give him equality. He can play just knight c6 here, he can play knight takes c3 if he wishes, he can play c6 here, he can even play bishop g4, with free development and no problems. The point is that c4 is a very combative move. It's very difficult psychologically for white to switch from combative mode back into this rather boring position, when black's pieces can stream out with ease and white doesn't pose any problem to black at all. No, the Icelandic Gambit is a gambit which has to be. You now have access to one of the little known secrets of opening theory, and that is 1e4, knight c6, otherwise known as Nimzowicz's defence. Now it doesn't sound like much, does it? And in fact the modern master wrinkles up his nose when he sees this move. But in the late 1980s Tony Miles took up Nimzowicz's defence, and his results since then have been nothing short of phenomenal. He wins game after game against masters and grandmasters alike. So that must mean that the opening has considerable practical advantages. Now if you put up a Rilo Lopez, a Sicilian, a French, a Caracan up against the average club player, he's going to know what to do. He's going to be ready to bash out his theory. But put up one knight c6, and most players are going to be thrown on their own resources immediately, and that is the major practical advantage of one knight c6. So come with me now and let's investigate this combative and aggressive riposte to 1e4. I think you'll be surprised with what you're going to see. The introductory position for Nimzowicz's defence starts with 1e4, knight c6. And I'm going to divide the video into three separate sections. In the first section, we'll see white playing the move 2d4, the most direct challenge to black's idea. Now I think Nimzowicz's defence has got a bad reputation over the past few years because it was assumed that after 2d4, black should reply 2d5, which can lead to some very dangerous situations for black if he doesn't know what he's doing, and he certainly has to concede the initiative to white. For instance, after 3 knight c3, which is an excellent move. So I'm not going to be as cooperative as that, recommending the move 2e5 for black, a favourite of Grandmaster Tony Miles. In fact, you'll see from the Miles game contained on this video that black has achieved excellent results with this move. In the second section, we'll see white playing 2 knight f3. Now this is a rather hopeful move by white. I think many whites play this because they simply don't know the theory on Nimzowicz's defence, and they're hoping that black is going to play 2e5. Well again, we're certainly not going to be as cooperative as that, going back into lots of main lines, and I'm going to recommend the move 2d6, whereupon our main lines will continue 3d4, knight f6, knight c3, and then the key move bishop g4, which can lead to a very murky situation. This is very interesting chess, and we'll look at this a little later on. The final section ties up loose ends, and I'll be dealing briefly with rare white second moves, such as for instance knight c3, bishop c4, maybe even the crazy bishop b5, moves like 2f4 and 2d3. Vague moves which prove that white doesn't really know the theory, he's just trying to play chess and get out of black's coming theory. Right, well, let's move into the meat of the video now, and we'll deal with 2d4, a critical move, grabbing the centre and putting the question to black's system. And I'm going to recommend the move 2e5. Now this is a direct challenge to the white centre, and white has three separate ways of dealing with e5. The first way is to take black's pawn on e5. D takes e5. In doing so, after the resulting recapture, knight takes e5, white hopes to make profit of the exposed black knight. I will prove that he is not able to do so if black plays accurately. In the second section, we'll see white blocking the centre with 3d5, whereupon I recommend black replies knight c e7, going into a temporary kind of huddle on the king's side. Now this leads to really difficult play, but I believe this variation to be more difficult to play for white than for black. Black has clear aims in mind. And I think black has two separate ways to play this, both of which give him a playable game. He can curl up into a ball and go for a King's Indian formation with d6, g6, bishop g7, and eventually f5. That's one way to play the position. Or he can try and unravel by playing knight g6 and then developing the bishop on f8 to either c5 or b4, usually with check and according to circumstances. Petroff's defence is characterised by the following moves. White plays 1e4, black plays e5, knight f3, and now knight f6, creating an immediate counter-attack against the e4 pawn. The Petroff is a very solid defence and forces white to fight hard for the initiative. It's especially appropriate when one is facing a dangerous attacking player, and it is used at all levels, although perhaps not quite as commonly as it might be at club level, where I think the Petroff could well provide lively counterplay for black. It's my perception that the average player doesn't really know the Petroff from the white side as well as he or she does if one plays the Italian game, for instance, or the Rai Lopez. It's not at all easy for white to get any sort of advantage at all against the Petroff, and this is why it's seen at Grandmaster level so often, right up to World Championship level, where it becomes almost a staple diet of black players when they want to keep white out. It's a workhorse of many of the world's top players, and it can work for you too. The Petroff is relatively easy to understand. It's an opening, firstly and foremostly, of simple development. Black should try to, in the style of the open game, keep pace with white in terms of development. If white doesn't recognise that black is able to do this, then white can well fall into difficulties. If white gets overambitious, then he can come into real difficulty, as we will see in the upcoming game, which is a game from China played in 2007 between Ivan Cheparinov and the Chinese Grandmaster Wang Yui. And it's my first introductory game. It will show conclusively that overambitious play against the Petroff runs aground, because black's play is so logical. And I think this is an easy game to understand too, despite the fact that it is being played at a very high level tournament. So Cheparinov was graded 2-6-5-7 in this game, and he simply took on e5. Black plays d6, nudging the knight back to f3,
and now Wang Yui takes on e4. This is regarded as one of two main lines. White can also play 3d4. We'll tackle the knight takes e5 line first, and against this move I'm recommending black to keep it simple with d5, basically freeing up his pieces, and after bishop d3, bishop e7. Hello, this is International Master Andrew Martin here, and welcome to my presentation on the modern Scandinavian for Foxy Openings. Of course, this is the second time I've produced such a DVD. We're going to be looking at black's energetic modern variation, starting with knight f6 here, and I believe that this is a playable line for black, moreover quite interesting, and there's some very sharp lines which you can catch an unprepared opponent on the nose with when you employ this enterprising variation. What I'd like to do now is to go through the variations I'll be examining on the DVD to give you a flavour of the repertoire for black. Well, white has quite a few moves here, and the first move we're going to be looking at is bishop b5 check. This is an attempt to more or less refute black's system, as after the normal blocking move, bishop d7, white's going to retreat his bishop, maybe with bishop c4, and try to hang on to the extra pawn. That's not the only retreat for the bishop. Well, bishop takes d7 is actually very insipid, so going back, white may try a move like bishop e2. That can be answered by knight takes d5. Moreover, after bishop c4, black has interesting jabs at the white position, maybe with b5, or possibly even with the more common move here, bishop g4, hitting the white queen and uncovering an attack on d5. So if white wants to keep the game on the boil, he's got to play f3. Well, as we'll see, this is the move which loosens up white's position and gives black good counterplay. Now, bishop d7 is a different recommendation to my earlier thoughts on this subject. On the early Foxy Openings DVD produced in the 1990s, I thought black might try knight bd7. Well, I think what I'm saying is both moves are playable, knight bd7 or bishop d7. Bishop d7 is less sharp to start off with, but it's a good move. Bishop b5 check, as I've said, is an attempt to refute black's opening, but white doesn't really succeed. I'll show that black has plenty of play in this line. Let's go back to knight f6 now. Of course, knight f6 is a direct attack on the pawn at d5, so it seems natural for white to defend that pawn with c4. As usual, this type of move is the acid test of black's variation. And here I'm going to recommend still, because this was my recommendation on the first DVD, the Icelandic Gambit with e6. I believe this is a move which gives black a lot of sharp play. I think the sacrifice is more or less sound, practically over the board. It can lead to disaster for white if he doesn't know what he's doing. And even if he does know what he's doing, I think this DVD will enrich black's chances. For instance, in the line d takes e6, bishop takes e6, and now knight f3, which was thought to be quite a severe test of black's resources back in the late 1990s, when this variation started to become really popular, as black demolished opponent after opponent with it. Well, here I'm going to show that queen e7 is actually a pretty interesting choice for black. That move not only threatens a deadly discovered check, it also gets on with development and prepares knight c6 and castle on the queen side as quickly as possible. That's just one line in the Icelandic Gambit, but I think the Icelandic Gambit is a good way for black, and the nice thing about it is if white declines the Gambit, let's say he plays a natural move like d4, well then e takes d5 just gives black a decent variation of the French, as we will see, where white's been lured into playing some sort of very unusual exchange variation. Going back to knight f6 one more time then, the third main line, and perhaps white's most common choice at grandmaster level, is the safe and sober move d4. White intends to follow up knight takes d5 with simply knight f3, develop logically and, well, more or less invite black to equalise. This is a slightly different way of playing for black than the one I recommended earlier on. There I was looking at the Jadoul variation, that's bishop g4. I'm not at all sure whether that's 100% sound. It's still possible today, but well, why not go knight takes d5 if it's playable? And after knight f3, a move which Gata Kamsky, the legendary American grandmaster, has been playing recently, and many strong players too, the solid move bishop g4. I believe this is a good way to get a pretty decent position with black, and certainly at club level, you know, if you know the themes and ideas running through this move, then you're going to get a good game every time. So that will be my recommendation here. Just dropping back one move to knight takes d5. Of course, white can play a move like c4. Then we're going to drop away with knight b6. And in this position, white's got to be a bit careful that black doesn't jab at him with moves like e5 early on. There are some interesting counters against white's early central advance that black can try in this line. And usually white prefers to delay c4, preferring to develop his kingside pieces first. Now, going back to knight f6 one more time, knight f3 was recommended to many white players when the Jadoul variation started to take off for black. Of course, this is a move which frustrates black's idea of going bishop g4 after d4, because white hasn't played d4 yet. But of course, this conforms with our main line, because black can just play knight takes d5, and after d4, bishop g4, we're back in what we know. Meanwhile, we just go back to knight f3, knight takes d5. If white goes c4 in this position and follows up with d4, then again black gets a satisfactory game by playing bishop g4. The nice thing about the Scandinavian, and it's always an aspect of the opening I've liked, is that black is more or less forcing white to do his bidding right from the off. The Scandinavian is a very forcing opening from the black side, and so there are very few casual moves that white can get away with in this position and hope for equality, and hope to get the advantage with, excuse me. So I think we've covered most of them. Bishop b5 checks c4, d4, knight f3. There are a couple moves remaining which we'll cover briefly on this DVD. Knight c3, it's well known that black has a very easy path to equality simply with knight takes d5 against that. And finally there's the move bishop e2, which was a recommendation of Nigel Davis, but again knight takes d5, d4 shouldn't lead to too many problems for black, as we'll see. Alright, well that's the repertoire I'm recommending for black on this DVD. Now it's time to go into a bit more detail.
Hello, I am Patricia Sanchez, Roman's chess student and chess enthusiast. Grandmaster Roman Djindjihashvili, a Russian and American champion, is continuing his widely successful and popular instructional series on this DVD. He will be focusing on the specifics of certain openings that he is famous for. Playing and understanding openings recommended by Roman will help you determine the entire course of the game. So grab your chess set and notebook and prepare to strengthen and enhance your chess skills.
As a chess player, frequently when my opponent plays something new that is not very well known and it's new to me in the opening, I don't feel really confident about it unless I see that he has made a mistake and there's something I can take advantage of. But if there is some brand new idea and you have to deal with it at the board, then it creates little commotion. So what I want to talk about now is I want to introduce you to a revolutionary, I think is the most exciting discovery. To me, it's the most exciting discovery I have ever faced in Sicilian defense. Now, I don't want to sound like, oh, hey, I discovered something that doesn't make sense or it's not credible. Well, let me give you some statistics. I played this variation of Sicilian against some top players in the world, and I didn't play them in tournaments because I haven't played this in tournaments. I played it in a blitz games or relatively quick games, but may not be blitz, like 10 or 15 minutes. And I have result of 85 to 90% scoring with black. Now this definitely means something, and this cannot be neglected. So here is what I'm talking about. E4, C5, knight F3. Now second move D6 or knight C6. Well, it's going to transpose after D4, C takes D, knight takes D4, knight F6, knight C3, and knight C6. Now, you see what I mean? On the second move, you could have gone D6 or knight C6. You still could have gotten this position. Now, this is maybe one of the most and the best known, one of the best known position in Sicilian defense. And here, basically are three moves, actually four moves. One is bishop e2, which is very harmless move for white, and main response for black is e5. The other move is bishop c4, that move that Fischer liked very much to play, and also very well analyzed, and lately white almost stopped playing this move. Now, the third move is f3 and bishop e3, or bishop e3 and f3 with this idea. And fourth, and by far the most popular answer, the most popular variation is bishop g5. And this is the move I want to talk to you about. Now, if you have your opponent played bishop e2 or bishop c4 or f3 variation, now you can pick up the information about it, and you have to study these positions, although they are not that dangerous for black. But what I want to discuss only the main variation, which is bishop to g5. I get a great deal of questions, requests actually, about not analyzing, but introducing the universal opening for white. And when I say universal opening, this is the kind of opening that you cannot have for black. Universal, that means no matter what black does, you can play same positional setup and same strategy. You don't have this luxury for black, for the reason that white starts first, has opening an advantage of first move, and playing the same way against e4, d4, or c4 may result to very bad consequences. Okay, so the opening I'm talking to is King's Indian attack. So, you know, you play like King's Indian, like the black plays, d6, knight f6, g6, bishop g7, and castling. Only you do this with white. The reason why I call it attack, because it doesn't mean that you start attacking for first moves, because they have to somehow differentiate the King's Indian, is it white or black? So they call it attack, but it's not an attack. It's just the system you're going to play. So you're going to start with knight f3, and no matter what black plays, you guaranteed to get the same setup. There is absolutely nothing black can do to stop you developing d3, g3, bishop g2, and castling. So they can go d5, they can go knight f6. It's a universal way to play for white. Now, the main and the most expected way to play for black is knight f6. Now you're going to go g3. They can go, I don't know, d5, bishop g2, probably e6. Of course, the black can play with g6. We'll cover this, continue. g6 or bishop f5 instead. There are many different ways. So in this position, so we go castle. We continue with our plan. Black can go bishop e7 on c5. It does not really make much difference. d3. Now this opening, okay, what is the strategy? Why would we play this opening? What are the advantages? Every opening has some advantages, some disadvantages. What is the main idea to play this opening? Advantage now? What? Yeah, that's. I will think if it qualifies as one of the reasons. It's not on the top of the list anyway. So, yeah, it's something. You have this strategy. You know what you want to do in the end game. Yeah, to avoid some critical variations, and it's like a lazy way to play opening. That's not what I would recommend, but you may also put it on the list of the reasons. But mainly is that you gonna get positions that you guaranteed that it will be no simplifications for black, and it's not, black cannot play something to quickly equalize or to exchange a lot of pieces that can lead to a draw or something like that. You guaranteed full-scale battle. Hello. Today my guest is Grandmaster Eugene Perlstein, used to be my student, and the topic of today's discussion is some more revolutionary development in the openings. Today's openings we have is a Scandinavian. We already had one DVD on Scandinavian, but this is different line, and we're gonna have now more opening revelations than we used to have in past, and theory will be changing more rapidly thanks to Ripka engine, which is absolutely, if you give it a little time and on a relatively powerful machine, it's totally flawless. That's why it makes a lot of adjustments in modern theory. So lately in Scandinavian defense, e4, d5, ed, queen takes d5, and knight c3 move. Knight c3 is by far not the only move here. There are moves like d4, knight f3. We're going to analyze them briefly, but right now we want to focus your attention on the knight c3 move. Eugene had a lot of, he has analyzed this position and he saw a lot of games, and he brought some material which we further refined, and we come to conclusion that there is no easy way for white to get an advantage, and Ripka agrees with us. Queen d6, d4, this is all very well known. Knight f6, knight f3, been played many times.